lies Voltron. Born 2016 and ripped away from us in 2024. Gone, but somehow not forgotten. Man, I'm gonna miss this show. Hopefully it gets picked up by another streaming platform. But what's that? No, don't! Ah! God, that was so stupid. Am I gonna keep that in? So, Klance, what's up with it? Just a quick rundown. Klance stems from a ship within the show Voltron Legendary Defender. I'll break all three of those things down for you. Ships are romantic pairings between characters. As an example, Batman and Catwoman are a romantic ship in DC's canon. Typically, ships are also given a name to identify them with, Batman and Catwoman being Batcat. Sometimes ship names are just a mashup of names, and other times they're a new word entirely that still relates to the characters. An example of this would be Danny Phantom and Valerie Grey from Danny Phantom, as their ship name is Grey Ghost, since Danny's half ghost and Valerie's last name is Grey. Moving on from fandom jargon, let's talk about Voltron Legendary Defender. Voltron Legendary Defender is a TV show that ran from 2016 to 2018, and it's a reboot of an anime from the 1980s. While this show has been rebooted before, none of its predecessors stand out quite like Legendary Defender. Mostly because of the fandom, but I'm not talking about any of that this video. I'm so sorry. I don't really want to think about the glass cupcake. The show follows 5 pilots, Keith, Lance, Hunk, Pidge, and Shiro, as they fly 5 semi-sentient mechanical lions that can combine together to form a big robot man, or Voltron. Behind the scenes, they have 2 aliens called Alteans, Princess Allura and Coran, supporting them in battle from their castle ship, aka the Castle of Lions. Together, they fight against an alien race called the Galra and attempt to bring peace to the galaxy. I have a video recapping and reviewing the whole series if you want to watch it. Just thought I'd mention it here. I also have a Lance-specific video if you're curious about that. Now, what's Klance? Well, if you haven't picked up on it yet, Klance is the romantic pairing between the characters Keith and Lance, aka the rivals of the group who later act as Voltron's leader and right-hand man. Their bond is super compelling, and I adore the way they bounce off each other throughout the show, but that doesn't automatically mean they're gay, right? Like most ships, I wasn't immediately convinced either, but a fan decided to make a big document called the Klybel back while the show was running that analyzed every single one of their interactions. I read it, and yeah, your 13-year-old me could understand Klance after that. Like many other pieces of Voltron fan content, the Klybel was deleted soon after the show ended, so I can't reread it even if I really wanted to. But with that lack of support to Klance as a ship at my disposal, I was back to wondering, why should I ship them again? So I may or may not have been taking notes on their interactions during my rewatch for that big video I posted, just so I could see if I still like them as a pairing, and yeah, I still see it, and maybe you all will too, because I'm taking you all with me on my Klance insanity spiral as I analyze why I ship them. Disclaimer that this is my own personal opinion. Last time I made a video related to shipping, I had a bunch of 12-year-olds in my comments whining about me saying Lego Ninja couldn't possibly be gay. Not that I think Voltron attracted that kind of audience. We were all gay in that fandom, but the shipping wars were atrocious back in the day. Next note, I will only be going over what happened within the confines of the show. While I love those sketches made by the show's storyboard artists, they have no effect on what actually went down in canon. I also won't be talking about the Klance was supposed to be canon theory because it hurts my brain to think about, and I don't know if that actually had any basis or if it was just a bunch of rumors. Anyways, let's get into it. I'll be splitting the seasons up into chunks like this just so I'm not constantly adding gaps in between my rambles. Just thought I'd clarify why I'm grouping seasons 1 to 3 together. So one big point that a lot of people like to point out is that Keith and Lance's rivalry in the early parts of the show almost entirely one-sided. Sure, Keith gets competitive and lashes out at times, but that's only after Lance tries to start something. And yeah, there are times where Keith is unnecessarily mean towards the beginning, but that's kind of just how he is with everyone except Shiro at first. Even then, that's how he is at the beginning. He moves past any distaste for the group pretty quickly. Even with this knowledge, Lance doesn't seem to take their rivalry very seriously. Like, he claims to hate Keith, and seemingly gets panicky whenever somebody talks about getting together with Keith instead of him, but he's still open to spending time and working with him. Keith offers Lance a challenge, but he's still pretty quick in becoming friendly with him, which is an interesting character trait. There are other aspects of their dynamic that are interesting, like the fact that they keep standing and sitting next to each other despite, you know, supposedly hating each other. Throughout the first season, it's more subtle things, but one explicit instance that stands out to everyone is their bonding moment. Partway through the season, Lance is caught in an explosion while protecting Corinne, and while he spends most of this little arc unconscious, he wakes up long enough to shoot Sendek and have a small moment with Keith. One where they're surrounded by purple lighting, hold hands, and give each other the softest looks possible while Lance says that they're a good team, quote unquote. And like, come on. After this, Lance is put into a cryopod, and Keith is very clearly concerned for him. Once Lance is out, he immediately fallbacks into making fun of Keith, who seems upset that he claims to not remember their bonding moment. They have some smaller scenes together, like when Keith saves Lance and teases him for being tricked by a pretty girl, and Lance once again gives Keith the softest look. They're paired together while infiltrating a Galra base and showcase that they really are a good team, and Keith saves Lance from being flung out into space. In the actual canon of the show, these scenes were probably just there to help build up their dynamic so that Lance could be Keith's right-hand man. There are also some comics that were released around this time, one of which is narrated by Lance. He calls Keith a samurai while blushing and narrates saying Keith's jealous after he flirts with Laura. Also, small note before we move on to what happens in season 2, but Keith tried knocking on Red's shield when he wasn't let in. You know, the same thing Lance did with Blue. This isn't really a shipping thing, it's just a fun thing I noticed about Keith. There aren't as many Klance scenes in season 2. We have the like that scene, which definitely sounded a bit sus on Keith's end. We got them working together to get into the castle's pool, Lance praising Keith behind his back, and just general bickering from the two of them, but I feel like that's just what makes the pairing so fun. No matter how much they butt heads, they're still able to be there for each other in the long run. Also, I'm not too disappointed about the lack of scenes between the two of them, since the show had to focus a bit more on Keith and Shiro's dynamic so we could build up to Keith taking over as leader. However, our next season is like a goldmine when it comes to Klance scenes. So just a little recap. At the end of the last season, Shiro went missing, and while everyone is affected by his loss, it hits Keith the hardest since Shiro was both a mentor and a brother figure to him. And do you know who everyone turned to when it was time to comfort Keith? Lance. They didn't even need to say anything. He didn't see them all turn to him when it came time to talk to Keith about his grief. He just went to him. And then he does it again when Keith tries to reject being the Black Paladin. After Lance is left disappointed when he's not chosen to be the leader. Lance is there for Keith, and whatever rivalry they had has practically disappeared, instead being replaced by a friendship between the leader of Voltron and his right-hand man. Lance continues to act as Keith's voice of reason while they head out on their first mission post-Lion Swap together, and they continue to have sweet little interactions with each other. Which brings us to the math scene. Well, it's not explicitly called that, but you'll realize why I labeled it that way in a second. Partway through the season, Shiro returns and it causes some issues. Specifically, it causes the issue that they now have 6 paladins and only 5 lions. Lance goes to Keith about this and suggests he step down so Allura can keep piloting Blue and Keith can have Red back, basically laying out his insecurities for Keith to see. Keith is baffled by this suggestion. He reassures Lance that he has a place on the team and that everything will work themselves out with the softest voice and look possible. And as he's about to leave, Keith tells Lance to leave the math to Pidge, and then Lance returns the soft smile, and it's just, oh my god! They know how to cheer each other up, and it's so sweet. While this last scene I'm going to talk about isn't as big, there's a scene where Keith lashes out at Aksha when she hurts Lance, and Lance saves Keith during his fight with Ezor, and then Keith gives him another love-struck look, and oh my god. Anyways, next season, I can't... What do you mean Keith leaves? So, Keith quits the team in season 4, and that's fine. The writers shoehorned Shiro back into the show and they needed to resolve the paladin issue. I have my thoughts on this situation, but I already talked about it in the last video. They have a little goodbye scene with Keith. Lance looks distraught, but so does everybody else, so it's not that big of a deal. Corinne does make a comment later in the season where he says Lance can have a ton of beautiful aliens spawning after him, and all I have to ask is, why didn't Corinne specify alien woman? Why are you leaving his options open, Corinne? I know what you are, Lance. Keith and Lance don't actually interact in season 5 at all, since Keith is off doing Blade of Marmora stuff, but I'd like to note one little thing. Partway through season 5, Lance unlocks his Beard's broadsword, which leads into a conversation between him and Allura where they cheer each other up. And I just think this scene could have been better if it was with Keith. Like, it doesn't have to be in a romantic sense, like it was with Allura, just Think about it. Keith walks in on Lance unlocking a sword, they talk about their insecurities and issues, and it makes sense for Keith to make fun of Lance for his stance because he's the team swordsman. In the original scene, Allura admits that talking to Lance actually makes her feel better, and if it were Keith saying this, it would have mirrored Lance telling him that he actually doesn't hate him right now back in season 1. I don't know, maybe I'm just blowing things out of proportion, but I'm convinced this little swap in characters would have been better. They spend most of season 6 separated, but when Keith returns to the team, Lance is incredibly excited that he's back, and he keeps commenting that Keith looks more grizzled. Like, he keeps focusing on his physical appearance, and that's a little... Keith has to connect to the Paladins while they're fighting Lotor at one point, and the first person he connects with is Lance, and that doesn't really mean anything, but like, shut up. Also, at the beginning of the season, Lance tells Allura that they make a good team as a way of flirting with her. And do you want to know who else he said this to? Yeah, I don't think I need to say it. Anyways, next batch of seasons. There's a scene towards the beginning of season 7 where Keith puts Lance in charge of the group while he leaves to help Aksha. And while this doesn't seem significant, I just want to remind everyone that Shiro and Grolia were there too. You know, the ex-leader / Keith's brother and Keith's mom. But no, he chose to trust Lance instead. A few episodes later, the team is thrown into a filler episode, and there's a point where they have to vote one paladin off so they can continue their journey back to Earth alone. Keith and Lance both vote for each other, which is interesting because Allura is Lance's love interest, and you'd think he'd want to have her best interest in heart, especially since she's the only one who all the lions are inherently connected to. Are you telling me he didn't want to vote for her to escape and instead chose Keith because he thinks he's the future? Look at that face! Look at him while he says that! Keith's reasoning is supposedly less sentimental, as he claims he just voted for Lance so he wouldn't have to be stuck with him for eternity, but taking how he looks at and talks about Lance in literally any other episode, I don't think that's entirely the truth, but it's okay, Keith. We all know you're emotionally constipated, so I'll let it slide. Also, Lance gives Keith the softest smile after realizing he voted for him. They make me sick. Later, the team finds themselves stuck in the middle of space, and Lance yells at Keith for running away, and ouch, I guess Keith leaving affected him more than I thought. Not much else happens after this, but Lance does find himself in a crash while the Paladins try calling their lions, and Keith sounds the most distressed by his radio silence. Then later, when they're all stuck in cells, Keith calls to Lance first. Just saying. Next is season 8, and I know that Lance and Allura get together this season, but that doesn't mean I can't think he has more chemistry with Keith than his own girlfriend. While Lance prepares for his date with Allura, he searches for Keith and scales the Black Lion just to confide in him. Well, yeah, this doesn't seem too romantic taking the context of why Lance is talking to him. They do watch the sunset together and get a shot suspiciously similar to a vaguely romantically coded scene from season 1. The two also stare longingly into each other's eyes while Keith tells Lance why he's amazing. Just saying. Wait, is this composition supposed to mirror the bonding moment? Am I stupid for only just noticing this? Lance and Keith have a moment towards the end of the season. Lance is feeling unsure about himself in the mission, and once again, Keith is there to reassure him that everything is going to be okay. I just find this really sweet because before this point, it was mostly Lance reassuring Keith of his role. They're supporting each other, and it's just... That's about it when it comes to Klance in the series. Lance's scenes pretty much center on Allura from that point on, and then he's damned to eternity as a grieving farmer. I just want to quickly talk about general character stuff before we wrap things up. Something I didn't really touch upon in my run-through of the show is that Keith and Lance mirror each other a bit. This is made pretty obvious at the beginning, but sort of dwindles out since Keith just leaves. Other than the obvious, Keith fights up close and Lance fights from afar. There are also opposites when it comes to how they react to a fight. I touched upon this in my Lance-centric video, but Lance always defaults to running from a fight if things get too messy. But Keith is always dead set on staying and refuses to stand down. Also, on top of just caring for his team, Lance knows that if they die, there would be nobody to pilot Voltron and therefore nobody protect the universe. Meanwhile, Keith refuses to back down from a fight because he refuses to back down from saving people. They both want the same thing and just approach it in different ways. This causes them to butt heads a bit, but it's such an interesting dynamic that I wish had been explored a bit. Also, while I already talked about Lance's sword, I'd also like to bring up Keith's gun. He only uses it like 2 times, but this could have been fun to address at one point, now that they both have the same weapons. Final note, these two go to each other whenever they're upset. They rely on each other to help build up confidence, and that is... So, should Klance have been canon? Honestly, no, I don't think it should have. Hey, give me a second to explain myself! I don't think that they were in a place to get together in canon. While I can't exactly put why I think this into words, a general thing is that I think Keith is still incredibly emotionally constipated and Lance is way too insecure. Obviously, you can be in a relationship and still be insecure. I just feel like he relies on outside approval way too much. So his type of insecurity may not mesh well with Keith's current state, if that makes sense. They wouldn't mesh well, especially if we follow canon through and throw in Lance and Alora's relationship drama. I also feel like Keith spent too much time away from the team for it to work naturally. Everything shifted around a lot, and the chemistry Keith and Lance had dispersed until season 7 because Keith wasn't there. I don't know, that gap really, I personally feel like Klance took a bit of a hit during that gap because we didn't have any content. Oh yeah, I guess there's also the whole dead girlfriend thing. But that doesn't mean I think they couldn't get together post-canon. The later seasons really showcase how everybody on the team has matured and grown since they arrived on Eris, and we can see hints of that through the season 8 interactions. They're there for each other, and while they aren't in a place where they can pursue a romantic relationship with one another, they're definitely getting close. So there was my Klance ramble. Honestly, I never expected they were actually going to happen since, you know, these types of ships almost never do, especially in children's media. So what do you think about Klance? Do you love it? Hate it with a burning passion? Maybe you're indifferent. I'd love to know. I'd kind of really like to keep doing videos like these in the future where I analyze ships, so please let me know if you'd be interested in that type of thing. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. I make art and commentary videos, and your support would mean the world to me. My Etsy shop and social media are also linked down in the description. Again, I also have a bigger Voltron review video and a separate Lance analysis on my channel if either sound interesting. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Also, does anybody know what was up with those red and blue stars in the astral plane, or